Watch my video. It's one of the best things I've ever done, and I'm very proud of getting my argument out on the National, the #1 news magazine show of Canada's news.
DML.
On the news. Here,
On the news. And the first thing David comes in, he goes, "Did you see my article?" I'm like,
Show that show.
I missed it. I'm sorry.
Show the National.
We have to watch this.
You have to watch the National.
We're going to watch the National. We're going to watch that. Not quite yet. Okay. We got to talk about what we're doing on the show first.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Getting ahead of ourselves here, ladies
But
and
the
gentlemen.
first thing we're going to do after we stop talking about what we're doing
Yes.
is going to watch the National.
Yes.
So that's coming up real soon, folks, so don't go away.
Very soon. We're going to watch David's new...
If you didn't Finlay right there.
Oh, and Steve is coming.
Steve's coming in.
So that's Steve out the window there. Steve Finlay from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And, of course, that's David Malma-Levine right in front of you. David is going to... So, David, just give us the breakdown of what your national video is about real quick.
Well, they did a story on does cannabis harm the developing minds of young people, which is the exact same thing I wrote a book on. So they asked me about it, and I put out my best argument that says it does not cause your children to be stupid and crazy. And then they interviewed a bunch of other people on the same subject. But I think I came across as being the most articulate and informed of them all.
That's good.
Yeah, so let's watch it. Well, what else are we doing on the show?
It's 12 minutes long, though.
It's 12 minutes long, but
and that's going to almost get into 420. So we'll have to wait
we
till
can't
after
watch it quite
420?
yet. We're going to have to watch it after we do our interview with Steve, I think.
Steve.
Yeah, then just because it'd be rude. I don't want to make Steve wait for 12 minutes.
Don't be rude.
But, of course, we will come back and we will watch the video, and it will be the greatest thing that David Malma-Levine's ever done in the history of television, or just the history of television itself. He said it's the best performance.
It's pretty important to get that argument out into the world at this time.
I always liked Lucy on I Love Lucy. I thought she was pretty good when it came to the history of television.
It's kind of the only thing they're using now to attack us with. So if we can fight back on this meme, this idea, this concept of cannabis making your kids stupid and crazy, if we can get the evidence out there that it doesn't, then we can have the kind of legalization we all want, which is the one that everyone gets a chance to participate in.
And David, they're chatting about your beard in the chat.
Well, it is. Us dealers have to show off our magnificent stashes once in a while.
That's right. Somebody said, "What's with the DML beard?" Another said, "David is from the industrial period."
Hey man, chicks dig it. When they stop lining up outside my house, I'll shave it and go some other direction. But you got to play with your face pubes once in a while. Otherwise, life is too short to be all conformist about your face pubes.
Right. So, David, and since we have you here, I wanted to talk about a couple other things that I noticed on your Facebook wall. One of them was the city of Vancouver has released numbers about 420. They released a big list of all the costs of 420, and apparently they're blaming us, or at least they're saying the organizers chose to have 2 locations this year. Oh, yeah. So they're kind of like
chose to boot us off one location, and chose not to boot them off that same location. So they chose it. Secondly, the reason they're called cost-benefit analysis is that you evaluate both the costs and the benefits of everything. You just do a cost analysis. You're not looking at the whole picture. Pride Parade costs a lot of money, but it's worth it because there's like hundreds of thousands of people participate in that. And same thing with our event is that people participate, they enjoy it, lots of people participate, and it's going to be expensive. If you want to cut down on costs, I got a suggestion. We'll deal with the rubbish removal. They charge $13,000 for that. I know a guy who would do it for $550. We can do our own security. Don't send any cops. We'll deal with all the security. We can pay those guys a fraction of what they're paying the cops to do essentially the same thing, which is once in a while escort drunk, obnoxious people off the property.
Right.
And that's all they really have to be there for.
I wanted to go over the numbers. I have the actual list of numbers here. So this is how it breaks down. The Vancouver Police Department, they say, so these are the costs as follows, not including regular staff time. So the Vancouver Police Department, $99,400. Vancouver Park Board, $24,000.
Yeah, they're paying themselves to show up and have a press conference next to our garbage pile. Hey, in the future, save you a ton of money. Don't have a press conference next to the garbage pile. Clean up the garbage pile at around 12:30 at night after it's done being collected. That'll save a ton of cash right there. Big savings.
So Wait, go back to the numbers here. Streets and sanitation, $13,600.
With $550, I got that taken care of. We've got a guy with a van. He'll take all the trash out to the dump.
But the streets added in there, that's not the same as just the garbage. I don't know what streets means exactly, but
We clean that place up immaculately.
it's kind of like...
We make a bunch of piles of garbage, and those piles normally get carted away by a normally cooperating city. They left it for 6 hours, and then things got spread out. But
Right. And that night, we could have had Joe take it away on a flatbed. He asked if I wanted to, and I said, no, they're bringing the truck.
Right. So we just didn't realize they were going to try to sabotage our rally. Now that we know, we're going to...
Of course they were. What do you...
Well, they hadn't for the last 16 years. They've been hauling away that garbage for the last
Look at
16
this
years
black.
with no problems. You know why the garbage hasn't been in the news for the last 16 years? Because they were cooperating with us for the last 16 years.
Right.
So why would we expect that they try to sabotage it now if they did it right 16 years in a row?
Agreed. It was a total...
We're testing some weed, David. This is number 9, CBD.
They set us
Renee.
up on that one. They told us they would pick up the garbage, and then they had a press conference in front of it.
And the best part about it is I took
instead of just
pictures
taking it away.
of the garbage in the back corner from
Yeah.
my place, and that field was completely clean at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
when I was there.
No, it's
well,
bullshit.
6 when I was walking down there, but...
It's
But
bullshit.
you can only do that once in a row.
So, J-Max in the house. So, Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services, $6,900.
Well, there was one guy who accidentally swallowed a toothpick, and
For real?
or a piece of a toothpick. So I brought him over and I left him with the fire guys.
Yeah.
But really, we didn't have... I like the fact that they're there. That's probably the one thing that I would say is worth the money, is having the ambulance guys around just in case there's an emergency. I appreciate that.
I
They're worth
agree.
the money. But that's all the taxpayers have to pay for. The rest we can cover, and there'd be no problems.
And traffic, special events, and emergency management was $4,100.
You know what? We can put pylons up ourselves. We'll do that next year. We'll
You
take
know
care
what?
of everything except for the fire and ambulance guys. Everything else we'll pay for. Everything else we'll take care of. If we need the cops, we'll call them. But we won't need them because we hadn't need them ever, really. Our security guys could have
And-
addressed any security problems that came up.
What about all of the other events in the city, though? They all have costs associated with them, and they don't
Sure.
pay for all these costs. They don't pay for all the sanitation of the parks at
I-
Pride Parade and
I
all that stuff.
noticed something, that conservative elements of Vancouver also shit on the Pride Parade people for the costs incurred to their
they
thing
do.
too. So
What is a city for except for these things? This is why we have a city.
This is why
why do we pay
GST
taxes?
and
Yeah.
we pay taxes, is so that we can have the benefits of society.
Yeah.
So they should quit bitching about it
Smell it.
and realize that not everyone is taking
Smell it.
off fireworks. Some of people like
smells good.
pride
Really?
for
Yeah,
formerly
alright.
scapegoated groups. Some people like to be involved in cultures and political processes. So yeah, no, that's what the city is for. That's what taxes are for. But we can cut down on a lot of unnecessary costs because we don't need the cops there. We don't need the parks board there. And we can clean now that we found out we have to clean our own garbage piles up, they won't pick them up for us anymore without having a press conference. We'll take care of that, and it won't cost 13 grand either. You got the
Yeah.
most expensive garbage pickers.
Well,
we pay,
that's
we
what
pay
I-
our people in joints. It doesn't cost us $13,000.
And they shut all the garbage cans down, so I don't know what those costs are for. Just to drive the truck out there?
No, the press conference.
Well, probably.
Getting and showing people
Hey,
up to
I'd
the
like-
press conference.
They had
And
a
then-
full command unit across the
and then
street.
things got spread
That's
out
why
a
they
little
spent
bit.
$100,000
I
on
wish
the cop
it
thing.
was. I
'Cause they
wish
left
they'd
it for 6
be
hours.
They had
a
to
little
film
bit
us do
more
everything.
detailed in their reporting of what they're paying for.
We'll
Because
just go line by line.
$100,000
don't need that,
was for them
don't
to
need that.
film us and take a really good look at us. Because they had a command
Well.
center set up across the way there.
Yeah, we don't need that either.
They didn't,
That's a waste of
I've
money.
never seen that before.
Stop charging for our own persecution.
right. So the other thing, there was one more thing I was going to ask you about, David, before we move on to our next guest, Steve from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I wanted to talk to you about what's going on. Oh, hold on, there's a bit of a. I'm going to hit refresh on this just so our mouths match up.
People need to be smoking more weed in here.
There we go.
I'm just saying, because I'm rolling as quick as I can.
I wanted to talk to you about Toronto and what's going on with the police in Toronto. The police, or not the police, the mayor of Toronto is talking tough, going into dispensaries, buying weed, saying he's going to shut them down, saying he wants to use enforcement to shut them down, or he says he could use the police and he could use fines and this sort of thing. What do you make of the mayor of Toronto and what he's up to right now?
Well, I don't have money for a lawyer, so I can't really tell other people what to do because I can't pitch on a lawyer. But if you have money for a lawyer, fight it. And if you don't have money for a lawyer, fight it anyway. We have video cameras on our phones. if police raid, we'll do what we did back in the 90s at Hemp BC, which is make those raids as noisy and as difficult for the police as possible. Obstruct every way you can. Throw sofas on the front of the back of the doors so they can't get in and out. Throw your bodies on the levers, the gears, and the apparatus until,
they
you say
handcuff
unless
you
they're
and throw you
free,
in
the
jail.
machine will be prevented from working at all. And make it cost them $500,000 to $1 million to raid one dispensary. They'll think twice about raiding two.
Yes.
And you got to show up on raid day with banners and signs and flags and drums, and you've got to have an instant rally right there. Shut down traffic. Make it very difficult to raid a dispensary just by getting in their way. You don't have to be violent. You don't have to touch a cop, but you can get in their way. We used to throw a sofa down in front of the doors, and it would take them 20 cops and an hour to get that sofa away from the doors afterwards. It was a big battle.
But do you really think the cops
Were you
will
on the
be
touch?
coming out to do any of the
You hope for
enforcement?
the best, you prepare for the worst.
I
That's what you
imagine
do.
it'll be like Vancouver, where we're getting these $250 fines. And tell us where you are in the process. You have a dispensary, the Stress and Depressed Society, and you're going through the city process.
I don't have money for a lawyer, so I can't fight it on those grounds, but it turns out we just happen to be far enough away from a school to be allowed to go through the development application process. And
You're going to pay the 30 grand?
No, we're not. We're going to try to qualify as a compassion club, offer alternative services aside from cannabis, but not yoga.
Don't you have to be a nonprofit society controlled by the members for that?
Well, we are a nonprofit society, and no members have been complaining that we're out of control. So,
Yeah. It seems like a sketchy situation.
well,
too.
we will jump through the hoops that require us not to cough up 30 grand, or we'll try.
Right.
Ash quality when that was what?
So just in the background here,
Ish.
we're smoking the Lift weed. We got all the Lift samples on the table. Johnny's doing some documentation. This is sample number 9 of the red area.
Thank God I'm colorblind because I thought it was green.
It's red.
It's red.
So David, before you go, I just
Yes.
wanted one more question. Did you
Yes.
hear that the members of Rage Against the Machine and
Public
and-
Cypress Hill are
Yeah.
forming the Prophets of Rage. Yeah, I happen to hear a little bit about that.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I would go to see that.
And are you excited?
too.
I want to go to there, but
I'm
I
gonna
want
go.
to
I
go
hope
to
they
there
play
very
Canada
much.
because I'm not allowed in the Snakes.
The snakes.
Yeah, the United Snakes.
Well, yeah. Hopefully they come up here. They
Hopefully
usually
they come
they've
up
done
here.
Rock the Bells and stuff, the Rage Against the Machine in their tours, but they haven't been to Canada for a long, long time. So
it sounds
Tom Morello does
tremendous.
come to Vancouver though.
Yeah.
Tom has been here a few times.
It's not outside the realm of possibility. I'm very excited about all such prospects. I think that would be a wonderful. I'd like to see a band with the cutting-edge political savvy of Public Enemy and the weed-centric riffs of Cypress Hill. That would be a nice
Right.
combo.
And
The
the
assertiveness.
slamming industrial guitar sounds of Tom Morello.
I know. I can't wait. I'm very anxious to hear that.
It's going to be
project.
fucking dope.
Flavor, what do you think of that?
So,
You like taste
chatters are chatting about it. I like the taste of this. So this is where the ash, Johnny said the ash was crusty ash. So now I'm putting it in the crusty
Well,
ash hole.
it's not like that
Crusty
soft,
ash hole?
really nice
Yeah.
ash. It's clean, but it's you know. It's,
Crusty ash hole.
Be careful what you put in your.
I'm
crusty
a like a
ash hole.
really.
Yeah.
I think Brian,
So,
Mr. Cookie, has got to be the hardest judge I've ever seen because I watch him judge shit, and he's like, I give everybody like 8s and 9s.
really?
Hey,
Hilarious.
So if
Okay,
you want the
A 1 minute warning.
okay,
1 minute warning.
1 minute. Everybody
after
light
you-
their joints. Get ready.
Yes.
after you show the CBC National thing,
Yes, I'll show it in a
provide
little
a
bit.
link
Pass
to
me
the
the-
Protecting the
some-
Young and the
some
Poor
of the
from
shit.
Prohibition report, because that report was featured in the National. We want to give people the link to that report. You can get it also, people, by Googling Protecting the Young and the Poor from Prohibition. It's my report to the Justice Minister that caused that reporter to make that report in the first place.
Happy 420.
Happy 420.
It's 420.
Okay, thanks, David. Thanks for
Thanks.
coming on. We love you lots. Mr. David Malmo-Levine, as always.
Keep
Check
your
out
heads held high.
StressedandDepressed.ca.
StressedandDepressed.ca for the finest in medical cannabis needs for SOVA, South
you go.
Vancouver.
Soto Sopa.
Oh, I'm gonna get that flavor like 7.
So, and Johnny, what were you asking for? You were pointing over here, mumbling.
Oh, I wanted that bag of solvents. Right,
Oh,
that right there.
solvents?
Yeah, solventless. Yeah, that right there.
Oh.
Yeah.
Stay away from the
Oh,
bar.
there's so
Give me the
much
number
stuff.
33.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to take photos of things before we
Okay.
smoke it.
I already know what I'm after.
Okay. That was David Levine. Up next on the show, we have Steve Finlay from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
Happy 420.
Wanted to have Steve on the show to talk about the latest with police officer from Victoria, David Bratzer, who I believe is the president of the Canadian LEAP now. Is that right?
Dave was the president.
Was the president.
He was the founding president of LEAP Canada. Currently, he resigned from the board and from presidency a couple of years ago because of the problems of this particular case.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if I thought maybe he was still there. So Steve, you are one of the members of, you're a civilian member of Law Enforcement
Civilian
Against
member of Law
Prohibition.
Enforcement Against Prohibition, yes.
Yeah. And you're the Treasury Secretary or something
Yep,
along those lines.
that's right.
Yeah, LEAP Canada. And so, can you tell us about what the Bratzer situation was really about and what he was facing there and what ended up happening?
It's interesting. This decision came out, by the way, exactly a month ago, on 420, in fact. And for the most part, David Bratzer won the case. What it was about was the actions of the Victoria Police Department, and it turns out to be more specific than just the Victoria Police Department, which were interfering with his ability to advocate in his own time for legalization and regulation of drugs. Mm-hmm. Now, he is and was always totally consistent in that he always makes it completely clear explicitly that he's speaking for himself. Mm-hmm. He is not speaking for his employer.
Yeah.
And that although he is, of course, a serving police officer, he's presenting his own views and those of LEAP, and very clearly distances himself from the police department or his employer. He always did that.
Yeah.
In spite of that, certain people at the police department took various actions that amounted to ordering him not to speak. And it turns out that the main instigator of all this was someone well known to us in Vancouver. Guess who?
David.
Mr. Jamie Graham.
Oh. Huh.
And in fact, in the final decision, the arbitrator did not order any systemic remedies because the arbitrator did not find systemic discrimination. The reason for that being that David's performance evaluations were always good.
Yep.
In fact, in some of those performance evaluations, his activities in LEAP were mentioned as a positive thing.
Huh.
Yes, they were.
Wow.
And
by his superiors.
By some of his superiors.
Yeah.
And there were positive comments made by many fellow officers. Not only that, but he was recognized as an expert in the area of drug policy and drug enforcement. And he had very good reviews from Victoria civilians of his work on the beat.
So who was it that was trying to stifle him in the first place? Who was it that was pissed off and said, he shouldn't be talking about legalizing pot?
Primarily Jamie Graham.
Right, okay.
And it's very interesting to read some of the arbitrator's comments. I would say essentially Jamie Graham managed to shoot himself in the foot at roughly above the knee. For instance, one of the paragraphs states, this is the arbitrator's decision.
Yeah.
Chief Graham had no specific recollection of the direction, that is the direction he gave to David. And then in brackets, the arbitrator says, as he did not of many things unless evidenced in an email put before him.
Huh.
The arbitrator also comments that...
So he knew in a way then.
Well, what the arbitrator was commenting on is the fact that Graham kept saying, I don't remember, I'm not sure I said that, I don't know, until David and the other side said, well, look, here's the email you wrote which says this.
Yeah.
So the arbitrator found Graham very evasive.
Huh.
And he also commented that Graham repeatedly said advocating for changing the law was breaking the law, something which the arbitrator could not understand and neither can anyone else.
Right. And so it reminds me a lot of what we heard in the Allard case, actually, with the judge rebuking some of the police officers there. It seems like, when they get in front of somebody who's actually looking into it, they kind of fall to pieces or they just can't stand behind their arguments or something. Because there really isn't... So what really was his argument against Bratzer's being able? He said this is interfering with his duties or something.
Yes, he tried to argue that it was making it difficult for Victoria Police to do their job. He was trying to argue that it caused great inconvenience and stress because of public questions. However, the media relations officer for the Vic PD testified that he hadn't had any big problems with it.
Right.
And the pattern that's consistent, and you're right about relating it to Allard, the pattern that was consistent is when somebody comes and makes an argument and cannot back it up with basically with solid statistics, as in this case, he said, oh, it was difficult. I kept getting complaints from the public. I kept getting stupid questions. And he couldn't actually count them. He couldn't actually give a specific example.
Yeah.
Similarly, in Allard, and Holmquist was the worst offender, he gave all these cases of this could happen. Or Holmquist would say, here's one example of this happening.
Yeah.
Well, one or two examples doesn't matter. What matters is what percentage did this occur? If you've got 10% of medical marijuana growers having some kind of significant problem, that's an issue. But when you compared what numbers Holmquist did have, which weren't many, but when you took those numbers and compared them to the number of actual medicinal grow-ops, you got really tiny percentages. Mm-hmm. And we did that work ahead of time. Bibas Vase had that work and used it to tear them apart. Yeah. There were other statistical errors in Len Garris. Garris's affidavit was better, but it still had a lot of statistical errors. Yeah. And the point of it is, if you're going to make your case in court, you actually have to do the work and have it solidly backed up.
Right.
And that applies to both sides. You also saw in the Allard case that some stuff on the plaintiff's side was dismissed for the same reason, because the person testifying as the plaintiff hadn't done the work.
Right, and really, I mean, what these arbitrators and judges are pointing out is the fact that these guys are totally full of hot air. And they're not just saying this in court, they're considered experts by the prosecutors. And then they're brought into court, and really what's being pointed out in those cases are their entire careers are fraudulent. Like in the case of Len Garris, this is the same shit Len Garris has been blasting all over the place for years with Daryl Plekas and these guys about grow-ups and all this stuff. Justice Phelan in that case just basically ripped him a new a-hole. He slapped Len Garris and Holmquist down pretty bad. And but that's the whole thing they were standing on for years.
Came from
Len Garris, that's
illegal
basically everything he's got.
grow-ups. Their statistics only came from illegal grow-ups and raised that had nothing to do with the medical system. So what they had was just they were comparing it to methadone. I remember that. I was in the court.
And that was the whole with Len Garris' stuff. He'd done some reasonably solid research, but there were two big problems. One is that most of the base was illegal, not legal.
It was all illegal.
No, there was a percentage that was legal, but it was small. Right. But the other problem is that the way that his sample was collected is based on operations, either legal or illegal, that had come to the attention of police or fire.
Right.
So this is not a random sample. This is a sample of ones that were badly enough run to get somebody's attention. What do you think? So that's why none of what Garris said could be safely applied to medicinal grows. And the lesson for both sides is have your facts well thought out. And people on the pro-cannabis side have sometimes made the same error. Don't make it.
That's right.
Do your work.
Right. And I thought our side in the Allard case did a pretty good job of that. We had a few of our people there, but yeah, I was I was really pleased about that because for years I've been watching Garris and Daryl Plekas and these guys who come up with these statistics. And if you actually do the research yourself and you try and follow their train of thought, they're self-referential. And they say, oh, well, a study that was done said this and blah, blah. And then it ends up being a study by one of them or one of their friends.
I was extremely glad to be helping those guys, helping John and Bibas with the Allard case because it answered a question that you remember I've been going after for 3 years. Yeah. You remember that 24 times more likely to have a fire statistic?
Yes, that one.
The RCMP used it in a report.
Yeah.
They quoted an unpublished paper by Plekas, which I couldn't get hold of. And I know I asked you and you couldn't get hold of it.
Yeah, I remember.
Well, guess where that report appeared?
Where?
In the affidavits. So thank thanks to that,
Oh,
they
it
put it
was?
in the
They
affidavits.
did.
It was there.
Okay.
So that meant I was able to read the report and see where it came from.
Yeah.
And it was the reason how he got the 24 times more likely is counted the number of fires at grow locations that were reported to the fire department.
Right.
And he divided that by the number of grow locations that had been investigated by the police. Now, when you took Stephen Easton's research, which estimates the real number of grow locations, and you divide the number of fires by the real number of grow locations,
Yeah.
suddenly the percentage is about the same as for houses. So finally, thanks to the Allard case, I was able to find out where that
That's what it
imaginary
was.
24 times came from.
Because I remember, I think you and I did talk about it, and I remember writing or reporting on this, that it seemed fraudulent at the time, and one of them piggybacked off, Garris was quoting Plecas, and Plecas was quoting Garris, and so there was this whole circular thing going on, but we couldn't figure out where they came up with this bogus number. But yeah, it was that. See, so,
That's where
but
it
of
is.
course,
It's
that would
in the-
make the numbers inflated by a hell of a lot, since there's countless grow operations that they haven't busted and
Right.
that have no fires and have no problems.
That's
and
right.
actually, what we figured out at the time is we talked to Kirk Tusaw, the lawyer, who said the data would show that people that have grow operations have less fires than people in regular homes. They have a percentage. It's actually
There are more
the
fires
they're
related
safer.
to hair dryers than there was grow-ups.
Right. It's safer if you have a grow-up house because you're paying more attention to the electrical and the other things, and it's usually people who aren't paying attention or who are being careless that have the problems.
Yeah, I did not find that statistical evidence. Definitely the statistics I found showed no significant difference.
Really, no significant
Really, no
difference.
significant difference. It's,
Okay. Right.
and the judge also pointed out that, for instance, if you're worried about electrical problems, you can fix the electrical problem by having it inspected.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to get rid of the grow.
Right.
You just have to do it right.
Right. Exactly.
And-
Yeah.
And I think
That's
there's
the sensible way.
Yeah, there's the danger that they fell into, and this is very clear from Holmquist and Garris. They were so sure that they were right that they actually didn't check their own work. And the same when you get to Plecas, who backs up, they did not check their own work. They didn't critically assess what they put in.
Right.
And there's again a lesson for the people on the pro-cannabis side. Don't be so sure you're right that you forget to check your own work. Always check it. Because I can give you a story from my new job where I work in a mental health advocacy place.
Yeah.
Talked to one client, and this guy obviously has unusual brain chemistry. The point is it does exist.
Mm-hmm.
This client was having psychotic delusions, vampires attacking him.
Wow.
They went away when he stopped smoking weed. So
When
be
he
aware. Stopped.
Okay.
So this guy's unusual, but know that this can exist. He was a guy who actually got his psychosis triggered by weed.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of thing we need to be aware of, that if we say nobody ever gets psychosis from weed, no, there are some who do.
Oh, there are. And you know what? I know for a fact because in my own experience, I had a friend who... selfies.
We're doing that.
So,
Closing.
yep.
Close the
A friend of
door.
mine...
Trying to hotbox this place.
A friend of mine has...
Close the door.
some sort of disorder. Now, we don't really know what it is, but it's probably schizophrenia or something along those lines. And when he smokes pot, he can drink, he can do acid, he can do all kinds of drugs, and it doesn't affect it. When he smokes pot, he really gets affected by it, and he starts tripping out and acting weird and being violent and doing weird things. One time he threw a basketball at my head. Like, just totally being crazy. And it wasn't him. His eyes glaze over and he starts acting nuts when he smokes weed. So yeah, well, it wasn't J-Mac. No, but so I know firsthand that, I've seen how he reacts to it when he smokes it, and it's definitely the pot that does it.
So for this
it's no
particular
question.
guy, he should stay away.
Right, yeah, exactly. And, it's not, I seriously doubt it's the
PTSD.
pot that's making him like that. It's bringing out something that he already has.
Exactly. There's
But-
got to be something off in the first place.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, Steve, now law enforcement against prohibition, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about because, we're kind of jumping all over the map here, but LEAP has been around for a while now in the U.S. and Canada, and there's a lot of police officers who, of course, they're on the front lines of the drug war, so they see how detrimental it really is. And in the States where there's a lot of violent actions from the police against drug users and breaking down doors and shooting people, and so they go through the wrong houses and shooting dogs and all this kind of stuff. The cops themselves are in a very sort of unique position to be able to bring truth to the public about those issues. What happened with Bratzer here in Canada? Have there been other challenges like that in other police officers who have been under fire for
there have been a great many.
LEAP?
There was Jonathan Wenders in Washington State, who was fired by the police department for arguing against the war on drugs. This was even before LEAP existed. And he ended up winning his case. He was ordered to be reinstated. The police chief said, "I don't want him," and the arbitrator said, "Well, that's fine. You don't have to actually have him work for you, but you have to pay him his full salary until he retires."
Wow.
So he won that one.
That's good.
The young man in the South who commented to one of his fellow officers that this border guarding for drugs is a waste of time, I don't know what's happened with him. Matthew Fogg in the D.C. area, he won his case where he had... it was essentially partly a discrimination case. But he had noticed that all the drug raids were being done in poor areas, never in wealthy areas where there were just as many drugs.
Right.
But it seems to be
Goes on
something
and
we
on.
have to keep winning. We have to keep fighting it because it keeps coming up over and over again. Dan Mulligan in Ontario was, to some extent, demoted because of his views. And he's won that case, and it set a precedent in Canadian employment law. But these things keep coming up.
Yeah. So I really do think that, for you as a civilian member, is this something that, it's hard to speak from this police perspective, but, encouraging other police officers to stand up on this issue, is that a difficult proposition itself? Is there, because they do go after the cops, it puts a chill on police coming forward, I would imagine.
I think there's a big chill because of them going after it. And for instance, even though David won, it was 3-4 years out of his life, caused depression, weight gain, a lot of problems. That's in the decision. Dan won, but he's still fighting with attitudes there. These things are a problem, but I think what's almost a bigger problem is the cultural aspect. Being a team player, being part of the team, and maintaining the blue wall. I think that's even a bigger problem than the actual sanctions.
Right.
And I do not know how to get through it. It's certainly something a civilian like me cannot get through.
Right.
Only a police officer can try.
Well, it reminds me, the movie Serpico is about that whole issue, right? Like
Yep.
he sees bad things going on, and he's not part of the crew.
That's right.
Yeah, and so no, I know it seems like that's a systemic issue when it comes to law enforcement in general, that there's this kind of boys club-ish attitude. It's kind of like a gang. And I guess in a way, it's hard to get away from because these guys are putting themselves in a dangerous situation. It's like it's like the military. When you are put under fire in that way, there's like this whole brotherhood thing that happens where you end up protecting the people instead of what it is the people do or something, you know what I mean?
I think it could be even tougher for the police than for the military, because at least in the military, it's perfectly okay to just blast away and try and kill everything.
Right.
In the police, except in inner city U.S., really you're not supposed to do that.
Right.
So it makes it more challenging. And in my new job, working here in the downtown east side with people with mental illness, I just could not imagine working in the police and dealing with some of these clients day in, day out for a 10-hour shift. It is extremely hard to keep an appropriate perspective in that situation, and that spills over into we are the only ones who know. If you aren't with us, you can't understand. And it can spill over into a dehumanizing attitude towards a lot of the people, and then that can spill over to affecting people who are just smoking weed.
Totally. And so how do we encourage more police officers come forward and join LEAP then? What is the strategies that you guys have at LEAP to do that?
We are still struggling. Until this case came out, we really didn't try to say anything, because with this case hanging, what could we say to a police officer? Hey, this might happen to you, and we don't know how it's going to come out yet.
Right.
So we have not had a strategy while this case has been going on.
So let's talk again then about exactly what the decision on the case was. I mean, we've seen a little bit from it, but they basically said that they cannot go after him for this. He's free to speak his mind.
Yeah, he's free to speak his mind. Now there is certain aspects of it needs to be done in a way that does not damage his ability to do his job. So you go back to, and it's interesting, it goes back to a Supreme Court case called Fraser, before the Charter of Rights, where Fraser was an employee of the federal government, and he was opposed to the conversion to metric measurements.
Oh,
Now,
really?
he lost his case, but one of the reasons is that he did things like compare the government's imposition of metric measurements, he compared it to Hitler's activities.
what?
And his public appearances were extremely aggressive and intemperate and so on. So,
Jesus, that's a stretch.
like, that's a stretch. But the point was that the way he did it was so extreme as to lead to anyone who had to work with him in his government job would have to start questioning, can I work with this guy?
Right.
That doesn't happen in the way someone like David, who's a professional, talks about the stuff.
Right.
So if he went too far in the way he talked, and in fact, in one of his complaints wasn't upheld basically for that reason. He'd been somewhat insulting in a newspaper article. That complaint wasn't upheld. So as long as he's not doing that, yes, he can speak his mind, and any other officer could speak his mind, again, within reason. You know, if you say drug prohibition harms people, costs money, creates crime, and so on, not a problem. If you say Jamie Graham is wearing jackboots, now you've got a problem.
Right. So you can't make it a personal insult thing or attack other police officers or law enforcement.
You can't make it a personal insult, or another thing you can't do, and this was going back to the Bradley Jardis case, who was a LEAP speaker in New Hampshire. He at one point said, I will not enforce drug laws. LEAP threw him out immediately. Because
really?
you take an oath as a police officer to enforce the law. So to actually say, not just, I want this law to change, what David says, but to
Right.
say, I am going to choose to change it myself and not enforce it. Okay, not only it's against your oath, it's totally against the separation of powers. It's
Right. Even though we have in the city of Vancouver, the chief of police coming forward during the time of the Olympics, for instance, and saying he won't be arresting people for marijuana. He said it to the newspapers and said, you know, if you have them, you smoke them, but we'll be arresting people that are drinking in public. And they actually came out and said that.
Yep.
And they've said it a few times, but that's a totally different level. That's, you can't say...
what that was a resource management
Yeah.
decision.
Right.
Yeah, that was a resource management decision.
Not based on an individual level. He's a person in the police force who has the authority
Exactly.
to make that kind of a decision.
And also, he isn't saying we'll never enforce the law. He's just saying this is how we're managing our people at this time.
Right.
And he has to make those decisions.
Now, what do you make of that concept? We have a situation in Canada and in the United States where from city to city, even from right here in Vancouver to White Rock or Abbotsford or some of these other places, we have such a disparity in how the marijuana laws are actually handled, where we have people not being arrested at all in some places. Here in the city of Vancouver, for instance, there was like 6 people arrested a few years ago in the statistics. And then when you go out just outside the city, we have thousands and thousands of people being arrested. Is that another one of these systemic problems where the police themselves have too much decision-making power on an individual level?
It is, I would say, it's one of the consequences, a somewhat subtle consequence, of the foolishness of a prohibition law. Because think about the law on marijuana technically if you take it literally, the idea is everybody who smokes marijuana should be in jail, right? That's sort of what the law says. Problem with that is that the number of people that would put in jail is somewhere around 100 times the number of jail cells there are in the country. So that means you actually can't enforce this law, except in a very arbitrary manner. So now what happens, you have an unenforceable law, something that you cannot economically and practically do what the law says you're supposed to do. And then what you have is a total vacuum as to what do I do and where do I do it. And this is why regulations are needed as soon as they can be created. And I do totally respect the time it takes to create decent regulations. Plus, because of the political sensitivity, there's going to be too much uproar about it, and it'll take even longer than it should.
Right.
However, you need the regulations so as to eliminate this kind of complete inconsistency that comes from that disparity.
Right.
And one more thing. Unlike a lot of people in the movement, and you would expect this, I'm the boring guy, I don't have a big problem with the fact that the first regulations are going to be unnecessarily restrictive. Because we're going from a position of stupid prohibition. The first regulations are going to have unreasonable things in them, like your 5 nanogram limit in Washington.
Right.
But to me, that's okay. We can start with that and then chip away and get them more rational.
Right.
Because at least you're arguing no longer about whether it's legal, but how it's legal.
Right, and that's
Exactly.
what we
I'm
see.
fully in support of that.
Yeah, and I see. Well, I'd prefer that we don't have the stupid shit, and I think we need to keep fighting so we don't have it in there. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, from a personal level, it's better than nothing, and it's better than what the status quo is.
I used to hide in an alley
If it is
to
better,
use weed.
increased penalties. On the other hand, if Justin Trudeau moves forward with increasing penalties for people that sell outside of the system and all this stuff, to me, that's not actually legalization. That is a form of, I mean, it's a monopolization technique that just hands it over to these very certain people. You know, I don't think people should be selling marijuana on a large basis if they don't have the license to do it or something like that, like any substance out there. But if you are, give some weed to your friend, or if you're doing something along those lines, I mean, I think we need to have
We all make
allowances.
beer in our basement.
Yeah,
we
you should
hang
be-
out with our buddies on the weekend, and we share our beer and,
that's
stuff like
something
that.
we really
And
have
I
to
don't
push
think-
for. And if we don't get it at first, we push for it until we get it.
Right.
But that's, if I'm going to grow a couple of tomato plants and give the tomatoes to friends, that's okay. If I'm going to have 50 acres of tomatoes,
Right.
I'd probably better have somebody checking what I'm putting on them.
Right.
Exactly.
Totally.
100%.
Yeah, and now there's a lot of articles coming out right now, and there's one that I saw that was disturbing to me were some of these the LPs that are coming out against the smaller dispensaries, and we're seeing them going to the newspapers. And there was I think a Toronto, or it was a Globe and Mail article that said that the LPs are lobbying hard for the government to go after the dispensaries all over the place.
It's cutting their grass.
Yeah, it seems like setting up these systems where we don't have allowances for things like home growing or a fair market that's all inclusive on this level. We're going to find more of these kind of plotting some people in the movement against other people in the movement situations where, you have people who are mad because these people aren't doing this and so on and so forth. I mean, isn't that a market thing? The reason I wanted to ask you this is because you also are very knowledgeable about markets, cannabis things. You know a lot about the economy and these things. We've talked many times about this. Is that an outgrowth of that concept? It's like dividing and conquering almost or something.
Yeah, this is a good question. Here's where I take off my LEAP hat and put on my academic hat, because I'm an MBA specializing in economics.
Right.
And first of all, I don't believe from my experience in big organizations that there's a really effective, deliberate divide and conquer conspiracy. Big organizations tend not to have that kind of intelligence.
Right.
However, what you do have happening here, and it's something that people need to watch for, and I recommend actually people study a little bit of policy economics in order to prepare for this, because what you've got is something that's called regulatory capture. And what that means is a regulation is set up, or a regulatory system is set up, and it had the original intention of safety or good management or whatever. And in the case of cannabis, what we have is to some extent, a desire for safety based on too much fear. In other words, people are trying to be safer than necessary. But be that as may, whether the degree of safety built into the regulations is appropriate or excessive, and I'd say it's often excessive,
Yeah.
regulatory capture means what's set up for that purpose becomes a way of protecting a cartel.
Right.
And your perfect example of this is taxi regulation.
Yes.
And this is what could happen with the type of licensed producer regulation that was created by the Conservatives. Because of their excessive security requirements, which are very expensive, it means only a small group can afford to get in. Once that happens, the economic motivation is always, it cost us $2 million to get here. We have to keep the competition out so we get our money back. Mm-hmm. And that phenomenon creates regulatory capture. It happened in taxis, and it has to be watched. We have to watch for it and push against it in the case of cannabis.
Mm-hmm. I love what C-Ray in the chat just said, the LP cartel. That's a good one.
And that's what it is, or that's what it can
is.
be. And even if the regulations weren't set up with that purpose, and I think the people who set them up mistakenly but genuinely may have believed they wanted safety and security,
Right.
even if they're not set up for that purpose, there is a tendency to turn into that. And people have to recognize this phenomenon and try to fight against it in cannabis and in taxis.
Right, and it's now, I mean, it's really similar to the Uber debate in
Right.
a way, where we have this app that's made available. It's a sort of marvel of technology that now we can have geolocation on every single human that walks around, and you have your iPhone, and you just press the button on an app, and it's a great concept. Ride sharing. There's a guy who's already driving to work, or there's a person who's already doing
Yep.
something, cruising around in his Uber car, and you happen to be in the same neighborhood. They can just come and pick you up and ride share. And so, but what we have is city councils protecting these taxi cartels. And really, to me, it's funny. I just by chance happened to sit through the Vancouver City Council meeting on this subject because there was a marijuana thing happening that day. Well, and I sat in council for like 12 hours watching everything going on. And that Uber thing was a remarkable debate because it just was total bullshit. It was total crap, in my opinion. And there was no good argument for the taxi cartel to remain the only people who are allowed to drive people around.
There's absolutely none.
No.
And it makes sense to say, okay, if you're going to do some kind of ride sharing, if you're going to participate in that, you need to get yourself some kind of insurance. You need to have, there needs to be an improvement in
Right.
security or liability versus what Uber now has. But
Right. That's easy enough to do, though.
that's easy enough to do. The idea that you have to have taxis because without taxis, it's impossible to provide that security, false. And it is interesting with taxis because it so happened that once I did some consulting work for a guy who wanted to start a limousine company. And I'd never been involved in taxi regulation before. Knew nothing about it. And he advertised over Craigslist for someone to write his business plan and communicated by email. And he emailed me and said, I need to get a license from the Passenger Transportation Board, which I'd never heard of. I got suspicious immediately. I looked up the Passenger Transportation Board, looked at the website, took only 15 minutes of glancing through it and looking at some decisions, and I emailed the guy again and I said, look, do you realize that this Passenger Transportation Board, its entire purpose is to keep you out? My phone rang, and the voice on the other end said, well, aren't you the smart cookie? But that is, the Passenger Transportation Board of BC is who does the licenses, and yes, it's very clear when you read their decisions that you don't get approval unless it's clear that you won't be competing effectively with anyone.
Right. Wow. And yeah, and they only give out so few of these medallions, really, or whatever they are.
So we don't want that kind of thing to happen to cannabis, whatever the intention.
Exactly. And I think that's what hopefully what I'm thinking is JT will let the provinces decide what happens on that level, probably, or let the cities decide what happened, rather than making some federal decision. I don't know. What's your thoughts on what could happen on that level?
Well, first of all, I think they need to
Speculations?
undo and clean up some of those regulations in the MMAR. For instance, the security requirements are too expensive.
Right.
And definitely They need to allow the licensed producers to have distributors. Because it strikes me as, if I was a licensed producer, I'd be so pissed off that I am not actually allowed to show my product to my customers.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to be able to wholesale that product to dispensaries so people can look at it and smell it and assess it. I think that regulation needs to change. Once that regulation changes, then it takes away the reason for the licensed producers to fight dispensaries.
But what you have with, I know a few that are LPs, they're growing, but they're growing for other LPs that are dispensing. So they're licensed just purely to grow. So you already have that in the system, what I understand.
Yeah, but the regulations the Conservatives created required the LPs to deliver to customers only by mail order.
Yes.
Right.
And I know lots of people who are saying, why would I trust mail order?
No, you shouldn't try.
Hey, you know what? And I think it was funny. I got my box in the mail, and the post office guy handed it to me. He goes, "Boy, you can sure smell this one."
Exactly.
So it's not like they're
so
so.
funny.
I mean, it's a system right now. It's set up to dispense through the mail. So as it stands right now, they don't know if it's. I guess from an LP, it would be packaged because it's express post, right?
Well, I wouldn't feel much better about that as an LP. I know that a lot of my customers don't trust
Me
it.
personally, I would always walk into a place where I can actually meet someone face to face and have that conversation,
Exactly.
get to know the vibe, what medication I'm buying, and not, I guess I don't want to treat my cannabis like it's like an Oxycontin. It's
Exactly.
It's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this. I look at it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
And it strikes me as the current regulations, because an LP is required to deliver only by mail order. How stupid is that? What it's doing is it's saying, in terms of customer service, and a dispensary, which is still illegal, in fact, a dispensary has a huge advantage.
Yeah.
So as an LP, I'd be really pissed off. I should be able to set up dispensaries or sell to dispensaries.
Yeah, and I don't have anything against the LPs themselves. It's just this ridiculous system that they've been handed. The thing that makes the LP system unfair is the fact that you can't grow at home right now yourself.
Yep.
And they're trying to really force patients with a gun to their head
Bill
to buy
S10.
subpar weed. Yeah, and there's a lot of the regulations that are really bad, like this whole zero microbe and all that kind of stuff, forcing some of them to zap their weed with gamma radiation and all these kinds of things. It should be less restrictive
Yep.
and more inclusive.
And I think it's probably going to take us a few years to get there.
Yeah.
I think so,
I would imagine.
unfortunately.
Well, and because the way Trudeau's going, who knows? I mean, he might be. He needs to smoke more weed, I think.
Yeah,
Maybe that would help.
A little bit of freaking out there.
Yeah. Did you see? I know this is a totally separate issue, but man, he really was going a little strangely. I guess they're all showboating in the House of Commons these days.
There is some of that. The other thing is that once you're in a government, you are trying to keep most of the country happy, which means you're going to be compromising. And as I said, the first compromises for cannabis regulation, I think, are going to be a lot more restrictive than is rational, and then it's going to take some time to push them back in the right direction.
Well, and maybe things like the courts. To me, you very, very rarely ever see any progress happening with politicians. It's always done through the courts. Pretty much every single decision in terms of marijuana, all the gains we've made, all of the progress has come from the court system, not from the politicians themselves, right?
Very true.
Yeah. So this is one of the first times. I think it's remarkable that Trudeau actually is doing something. We voted him in with this as a platform, or he ran on this.
And there's no question it helped him.
Right, it did. Oh, for sure it did. And but he said he was going to move on it right away, and kind of I think that's where he wasn't quite honest about things. We thought he'd probably be decriminalizing and looking at expunging people's records right away, but he says he's not going to do that.
Yeah. And we in LEAP always oppose decriminalization because that is in fact the same thing that alcohol prohibition was.
Right, but wouldn't it be better to immediately stop arresting people for marijuana than continuing to arrest people for it? Whether or not you have that whole legalization system set up, I don't really. So, are you saying that there's something to Justin Trudeau's argument that by decriminalizing, we'll be handing money over to gangs in a different way. Doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, there is something to that.
Yeah, there is something to that. The problem being that if you haven't set up the legal production distribution system, the law is essentially saying that by definition, if you want to get into this business, you've got to be a criminal. And that's not a good situation to have. That's the problem.
But wait a second though. Isn't it doing that now? Like,
Yeah.
there's no law against clipping up grass and selling it unless it's hurting someone or there's some problem with doing that. And they don't have a whole system set up to deal with that either. So gangs, if there was some need for grass or whatever, gangs could do that too. I don't understand why the gangs should be treated any differently than anybody else or anything. If they want to go legit and marijuana doesn't hurt anyone, what's the problem?
I agree. Gangs should be able to go legit. You have to have the rules in to be able to go legit.
Right. But I mean, can't you just say, well, we won't arrest anyone for it? And how does that actually start a problem? Like, where does the actual problem start in that?
Well, again, that was the law regarding alcohol throughout the 20s.
Right.
That was actually the law, was that drinking was legal.
Right.
Selling was illegal.
Right. Yeah. Similar to what we have now.
Similar to what we have now. And if you so-called decriminalize, you make it legal to smoke, but you don't set up a legal system, you really are, the benefits all go to people who are operating in the illegal system.
Well,
we're lucky that some of those are good people, but you really want to get that legal system going.
But isn't it semantical, though? Because what we're saying is a legal or illegal system. Well, if you decriminalize, then you make any system legal.
No, okay, decriminalize depends on the meaning.
Right.
Usually or very often, decriminalization means I won't arrest you for owning it or smoking it, but I can still arrest people for producing it or selling it. That's the meaning of decriminalization.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay, that's the definition. But now, what if you just said we won't arrest anybody for it on any level, like total decriminalization of it, and including allowing people to manufacture it in large amounts? I guess you'd.
Good question.
Just like anything else, couldn't you say, well, there's a whole bunch of laws that deal with any substance like that. If you are selling for a business purpose, that's a different law. There's no marijuana law, or there's no law for each substance that you sell. It's just if you collect taxes on it, or if you sell it, you have to pay taxes for it.
And that may be a very rational approach. That's to say, okay, we've got laws applying to agricultural products. Just as of now, these all apply to marijuana.
Yeah.
I think it's rational and could work. It takes a level of political guts that the country's not ready for, I suspect, which is why we haven't seen it proposed.
Right.
If you think rationally, it's a good idea. It would be political suicide at this point.
Why do you think that? Just because of the country itself not responding correct? Like if Justin came out and said, yeah, we should treat it like everything else. That seems like a pretty good talking point to me. Why would you treat it differently if it's not hurting anyone and it's a lot less harmful than alcohol and other substances?
And from our side, we can see that, but remember that something like 70% of the Canadians don't smoke.
Right, yeah.
And don't necessarily understand.
Yeah, I agree with you on that side. I guess even Justin was under a lot of fire from conservative Canadians for moving as forward as he has been going with it. So they've really been sticking to this think of the children argument, where it's, we're doing it to, stop the gangs and stop the put the kids in a safer situation. That's what Justin's been saying, which I think is good, and it's true.
It's a useful argument, yeah. And it's true. It's not the only argument, but it's helpful.
Right. But I still think that if you decriminalized it and stopped arresting people for any of that, rather than arresting people for possession, at least right now, simple possession, like
I think
it's just like Mexico or some other place. You could do it, and it's not really going to hurt anyone.
Well, you really don't want to be just like Mexico, do you?
Well, you don't want to be like Mexico, or how about there's a whole range of places who have put decriminalization in, and it's been a positive effect. Like Portugal, for instance.
Portugal is
that's right. And LEAP generally supports a decriminalization, but is always emphasizing you cannot stop there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and again, I think it's just how you define these terms. For me, decrim. I want it to go. I want full legalization, but I sure would like them to stop arresting people for it right now while they get to this whole new system.
Yeah.
Like I think it's a crazy thing to waste police resources on arresting anybody for cannabis at any time.
And that I think would be that's something that I would hope police managers start thinking about is the resources.
Right.
Because just on that basis, you can say, I can think of better ways for these people to do their job.
Right.
I sure can in the downtown east side, I can tell you.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and on that level, the decriminalization of all drug use, by setting up systems that are there to replace it. I think we do have some of that in Vancouver, and I'm sure things would be a lot worse in the downtown east side if we didn't have things like Insight or places that people could
They
get help.
would be,
places
but
inside.
look at the Insight is helpful. It's saved a lot of lives, but there's such a vast opportunity being missed. Just imagine if there was a legal, safe supply of smokable opium.
Right.
Do you want to try to sell injectable heroin against that? Cheaper, safer?
So you think that would be a good thing?
Yeah.
Flood the market with opium.
Well, you don't have to flood it. You just have to make it available
Right.
so that people who spend every minute of their waking life desperately trying to pull together $100 a day or whatever it is for heroin can instead go somewhere, buy some smokable opium for maybe $5 or $10.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they're going to need. They're not taking the risk of HIV, Hep C, overdoses.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
And
become a way of
then
life
they
at
have
that
some
point.
time to actually have a
The
life.
best way of saying that, it doesn't become a way of life because a lot of people
Yeah.
that are on these drugs, it becomes a way of life, and that's the best way of saying it.
That's exactly
and,
what you
and,
said.
and that's the hardest thing about when someone is suffering and stuff like that. And what Steve, I fully understand what you're saying is with this type of access, it's not a way of life for them anymore. They can get away from what they're doing and actually try to get better or to be able to live a better quality life and not cause any more harm on
That's
society.
right. And some of them may decide, I don't need the opium anymore. Some of them may just be able to have a perfectly productive life smoking opium now and then.
Right. But again, I think that, isn't it that heroin is a much stronger jolt than opium in a lot of ways? And people really, when you
Same
get to a
thing.
certain level, you kind of
Same
want
thing.
that. I mean, it might
Same
be
thing.
easy to get off it, but for the people who, there's a lot of people who
Wait a
use those
second here,
drugs and
heroin,
don't.
the exact same thing. There's
Yeah?
no difference. It's
You can
still
smoke,
based.
really? You can smoke enough opium, I suppose, to be just like heroin. But that mainlining though, man.
It's
Woo.
the same thing. So Tylenol 3 to heroin to opium to OxyContin. It's all based from an opiate. It's all
Well,
the
what
same.
you've got
Well-
with heroin
They all
and,
back
for
to
instance,
the same
crack
receptor.
cocaine, this is what's called the iron law of prohibition. And the iron law of prohibition is that if you make something illegal, then the most concentrated versions of it take over the market. And for instance, if with alcohol prohibition, that turned the U.S. from largely beer and wine drinkers into hard booze drinkers. And after the end of prohibition, it literally took about 40 years to get back to where it was.
Really? And because you had to have a smaller amount of it and all of this kind of stuff, the extracts were the way to do it.
You had to have a smaller amount so you could store it, so you could conceal it,
Thank you.
and also to maximize your profits. And that same thing motivates.
Marijuana.
That's true. There's very high THC versions, largely because of prohibition. And in the case of heroin,
Yeah.
in the countries where it comes from, a lot of people don't use heroin; they smoke.
Right.
But you take it to the countries where it's illegal, you need to concentrate it in order to hide it and sneak it in. One dispensary owner in Vancouver once told me that he'd been able to get a bunch of coca leaves once for some reason. Don't know how he did it, but he brought in a bunch of coca leaves.
Huh.
And he said all the crack addicts were just overjoyed. I can chew a coca leaf.
Really?
Yeah, it's way healthier. It doesn't zoom me out, and it satisfies me.
Well, we can
Dana
get
always
coca
talked
leaves.
about having a coca leaf place you could chew on coca leaves.
Dana's
and stuff
always
like
chewing
that.
coca leaves.
And that is his biggest thing.
His
And yeah,
mouth is constantly full of coca leaves, even when he's on the show. It's absolutely disgusting. Yeah. But
So I mean, and so it's great. I mean, I got some cacti. That's great for cacti tea in the morning. Gives you some good energy.
I'm gonna hit this dab. But yeah,
Keep-
I think, Steve, I'm totally with you on that. And in fact,
100%.
there's other drugs like ibogaine and natural drugs, natural plants that can help people get off of these things and actually get clean if they want to. Like that. What do you think? Have you heard about this ibogaine? And as a person who works in this field, what do you think of that?
I'd have to defer to Ken Tupper on that. Ken Tupper from Victoria, he knows much more than I do. I've read reports that indicate it may work, There's also a lot of experimentation with MDMA for PTSD.
Yes.
And the general principle is that the idea of a drug being good or bad is very unwise, because it's how and when you use it and what you use it for, of any drug, and that includes pharmaceuticals. I'm looking at some of the things that I see some of our clients prescribe scare me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that the pharmaceutical is totally bad, it's that in some cases it would work, but there are cases where I'm seeing people given drugs that I look at and I think, that might not work. That's a hammer to kill a fly. Aren't you doing the wrong thing here?
Right. Yeah. And with those pharmaceutical drugs, there's pretty harsh and a lot of side effects sometimes. I've done a lot of my own experimenting with MDMA, and I can say that the side effects of MDMA are pretty awesome, actually. I appreciate the side effects of MDMA.
Now, one thing you don't appreciate, have you noted have you heard what the rave testing organizations have found out?
No, I haven't.
In a typical rave, 75% of what's sold as MDMA isn't.
Oh, of course.
And this, again, that's prohibition.
Right. Yeah, if you could have good quality stuff that's tested, and they at some of these raves or at some of the festivals, they have a thing called Anchors, a group that goes there and provides testing for people for free, and you line up and you can bring any kind of drugs and have them tested to see if they're pure or if they're the actual drug that they said they are. But when it comes to MDMA, the actual MDMA, I think that it for me has been extremely therapeutic with anybody that I ever take it with. It has a very healing effect on your own. You can sort of be introspective and look inside, and that goes for a lot of these psychedelic drugs, LSD and other things. I think that with such a weird euphoria phobia that we have, we're limiting ourselves in so many ways by not using science to look at the effect of these drugs on our brain and where it actually goes and what that stuff means, really.
Exactly.
Yeah, to me, it's a weird. Is that a side effect of this? I mean, where this euphoria phobia? What do you think that stems from, and why is it with these drugs but not with alcohol? I don't get it. Do you have
That's
any
a good
thoughts
question,
on that?
and one of the theories is that it goes back to the Puritans, who applied it to alcohol as well.
Right.
And there's the old joke about Puritanism is the horrible fear that somebody somewhere might be having fun.
It's true.
I don't know. I'm not sure if that's a whole explanation. It somehow feels like there needs to be more of an explanation, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's weird, and it just seems like to me it's such a double standard where maybe it's just because the propaganda's been so thick for so long, but I mean, people get shit-faced drunk every night on Granville Street and do all kinds of stuff. There's ambulances down there, police. Like the police budget for Granville Street in a month, because of all those bars down there, I can't even imagine what the police budget is for that. Comparing that to something like 420 or any of these events, or even just comparing it to people smoking weed, in any case, the cops wouldn't need to be involved. So, I don't know, to me it seems like a weird double standard when on every corner you can buy alcohol and drugs and everything. But, the weed is bad for some reason.
It's an absolute double standard because there's a lot greater risk with alcohol.
Yeah.
And there is not enough attention paid to how do you evaluate the types of regulation, and this I apply to alcohol and weed and everything. There's not enough attention paid to, I'm going to look at this type of regulation and I'm going to actually quantify and evaluate the consequences of the different type of regulation. And we're going to make our decisions not on the basis of a moral judgment and not on the basis of emotional attitudes that come from all sorts of places. We're going to make our decision on the basis of what are the real effects? What are the effects on the people who take it and the people around them and the society around them? Mm-hmm. That's the kind of approach we need to evaluate alcohol regulation, weed regulation, taxi regulation. And like
exactly.
I said earlier,
anything that doesn't hurt people, it seems odd that people want, like this Uber thing. Again, it's funny that it's again a type of prohibition on something that doesn't hurt anyone, and you hear all the same kind of excuses in the Uber debate as you do in the pot debate. I never really thought of that before.
Yep. And
No,
what
Uber's good.
and what you need, for instance, for some
Yeah. J Max piping up, but he doesn't have a microphone. Keep
for
it down
something
over
like
there,
Uber,
Peanut Gallery.
Yeah, for something like Uber, as we talked about earlier, reasonable regulations to ensure that nobody gets mugged in an Uber car.
Right.
That can be done.
Right, exactly.
With pot, reasonable regulations to ensure that when I buy something, I can see what percentage of THC and CBD is in it.
Right.
That's good enough.
Or if that even matters, though, really. Like, see, for me,
Well, it does when you're trying to work on a medication or something like that. You want the same kind of accuracy, the same profile. So for someone like myself as a patient, I want to know what those numbers
Yeah,
are.
for
So
sure.
that way I know what I'm taking.
But it's not going to hurt you if you don't know the number.
Well, for me, I want to know because, for instance,
As a patient, yes, but as a
I can think
recreational
of-
As
user.
recreational, that's different. But as
Yeah.
a patient, I want something that's quantified. Something that's going to be the same. as
even
what they-
recreational, I want to know. Like just when I drink beer,
Yeah.
I want to know if it's 9% or 5%.
Well, you want to know the percentage of, yes, I guess that's true. But again, having, I think, if we're trying to be scientific about this, giving a value to indica versus sativa in a scientific way, in the same way that we're talking about a percentage of alcohol, is actually not backed up by the evidence. It's not backed up by science. And there's some sativas, you know, if we're when a person has that alcohol number on there, you can be pretty damn sure that that's a standard. That's why they can test for alcohol in your blood and things, and it actually has a pretty strong bearing on your actual impairment. You know, but with marijuana in your system and stuff, it's a lot. There's no way, just because you have THC in your system doesn't mean you're necessarily
Yeah, and
impaired.
I'm not talking about impairment at the point. I'm
Right.
talking about as a consumer.
Right, but I mean,
As a
even,
consumer, I want to know, and even for recreational. Now, I haven't smoked very often, as you know.
yeah,
But I can think of 4 different times when I got 4 completely different effects.
yeah.
So
But what I'm
if the
saying
stuff
is,
was labeled, I would have an idea, okay, if I smoke that stuff, I'm getting this effect. If I smoke that stuff, I'm getting that effect. I want to know that as a consumer.
but I challenge the word sativa and indica.
And I'm
as
not proposing that either. I don't
Yeah.
think that's effective. I would want to know CBD, THC.
right, those kinds.
That's
of
what
things.
I would want to know.
I see. Okay, yeah.
Yes, indica and sativa, from what I've seen, it doesn't seem to tell you hardly anything.
No. So the issue with the knowing the rates of CBD and THC in each strain is, one, I mean, that's a lot of testing because people grow so much varied amounts of strains. I know as a person who's doing the buying now for a dispensary that would be remarkably difficult unless you had a device yourself that could test those things.
Well, there's
Some of
something
us
where
do.
I would like to see the somebody like Health Canada take some leadership.
Right.
You remember the Cannabis Summit here a year or two ago in UBC? One of the things that people pointed out was that there isn't a standard for how you do the testing. And
Right.
people, it doesn't really matter so much which one, but just make up your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Choose a reliable standard so we can all start using it, and then we'll start to learn something.
Yeah.
Again, because it was prohibited for so long, there was not only no motivation to do that, there was every discouragement to stop you from doing it.
We never got a chance to explore it. We never
Yep.
got a chance to scratch the surface, what we're doing now.
And we need it.
And it's so needed because we're realizing, I mean, like I say, it's a food, it's a fuel, it's a fiber, and it's a medicine. Why are we fighting against them?
And
Yeah.
there are over 100 cannabinoids in cannabis.
That's right.
Thanks, Peter S. in the chat.
Yep.
And told J-Mac. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think there should be some testing, but it could be prohibitively expensive for smoking pot. And again, it's I think kind of more of a luxury to know those things than something that's necessarily based on a safety concern. I mean, sort of. I guess for some
Yeah,
people
it's
it
not
would be.
particularly
For
a
some-
safety issue
Right.
because you can't kill yourself. It's not like alcohol
Right.
where you could kill yourself with a bottle.
But
Yeah.
I deal with people who have epilepsy, and they need to know those numbers because if
Right.
they're
For
not...
patients, it's a difference.
That's what I'm saying,
And
for
therefore,
patients.
which
Yeah.
is, for medical, it's absolutely
Mold
necessary.
and pathogens
Right.
are huge. Like
Yeah,
we
for
should
sure.
be testing for mold and pathogens like crazy. I mean, like I was when they were mentioning it from Tim down at the Secret Cup, down on the, like that whole thing there of all these molds and pesticides and everything else that are showing up in the cannabis by these growers. And really, in reality, when it comes down to the end user, they shouldn't have to be able to take that. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm not sure the science.
testing. Well, there is a lot of science, and we're seeing more and more of it, and we're
There's
seeing
some-
it in
there's some
the
science there.
rosins. I
But
could
remember,
taste
there's
it
a lot of
in
cannabinoids.
in some things.
The entourage effect, I'm not really sure we understand completely how that works yet.
We don't. We have a lot of work to do, and it's
You know that the full
again
plant
because of
profile
prohibition
is-
for so long. 20 years of research should have been done and never was.
100 years of research.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100 years.
Well, Steve, I really
A 100
appreciate
year lie. I mean,
having you on today.
yeah, it's great to
I-
always listen to you, Steve.
Yeah, and now you know such a wide range of things and have a lot on your mind all the time. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about today while you were here? I don't know. We went all over the map. We covered a lot of ground, so I was just I didn't know if you had anything else in mind. as to
I
why-
don't think so. I think you've covered just about everything that I could think of.
Good. I'm
Thank you.
glad. Well, Steve, we'll definitely have you back again soon to talk about more. And yeah, the one thing we didn't really address actually was in the Allard case. We forgot to talk about the latest in the Allard case, which is we lost the appeal to widen the injunction. Can you tell us kind of what was up to bat there and what happened?
Unfortunately not. I didn't follow the appeal.
Oh, you didn't? Oh,
No,
okay.
what I do know is that Canadian courts are quite good at, they try to be very careful not to legislate.
Mm-hmm.
They try to make decisions as narrow as possible so that they will invalidate a law that doesn't stand up constitutionally,
Mm-hmm.
but they try not to take actions that have the effect of creating a law. They insist that Parliament get off its butt and do its job.
Right.
And so my guess is, and as I said, I haven't looked at it, my guess is that the limits on the injunction were more or less the consequence of the judge being careful not to get into having the effect of legislating. That's my guess.
I think you're absolutely right. And Justice Phelan said when the case was happening. Now, what was up for grabs was this when the injunction was made, and of course, for those who don't know the Allard case, I mean, there's a lot to it. But essentially, it was the government of Canada trying to take away home growing from growers and handing the system over to large corporations where you have to do the whole mail order thing. There was a class action
And remember
lawsuit.
that John's lawsuit was not about don't create the big growers. It was about don't prevent the people that want to grow their own.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
And
don't
so-
take away my right to grow my medicine.
And the injunction was that the people were allowed to grow at home, continue to grow at home until the case was solved. But as part of that, if you didn't have the original address, then you weren't allowed to grow anymore. So there were people that, some house had a mudslide or somebody had to move because they had to, there's 1,000 reasons that somebody has to move. Well, those patients would no longer be valid to grow at home. They missed out. And at the same time, they put a limit on how much you can carry with you to 150 grams. So that's a lot less than what people were used to in a lot of cases. So I think that John and his team tried 4 times to have them widen the injunction, and Justice Phelan didn't go bite on any of them. And he actually came back and said he didn't want to tinker with Justice Manson. Manson before was the guy who put the original injunction through with those limits. He didn't want to screw with his system. He said, he already did the job, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to touch it. And so
No
they
one
kept
wants to
prodding,
touch it.
and no, he didn't go for it. So you can't, if you've moved, you're still screwed, and you can only carry 150 grams. And that was the whole thing.
Well, that's bad for a lot of people.
Yeah.
For somebody like myself, now that I can go in extracts, because if I was going to go away for like I am for 10 days and I'm like 30 grams a day,
Right.
I can't go away
And
for
it's
10 days.
another example of those regulations that start out being unnecessarily restrictive without a good reason, and that will then be we have to
Repealed.
take our time to push back and correct over time.
Right, exactly.
I'll sit
Well,
here and
thanks a
puff
lot, Steve. I really appreciate it. Always pleasure having a conversation.
Thank you, Jeremiah,
like this
very
with you.
much.
For sure, and we'll have you back again soon. You can find out
Thanks
more.
for the hard work that you do,
Leap.cc is the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition American website, and you have a Facebook page as well, right?
We have a Facebook page, although we've been so busy it's not very active.
Right. Yeah, I think I saw that post in
I
May or
understand
something, but yeah, that's at facebook.com/ or you can just type in Leap Canada, I guess.
Leap
right?
Canada, yeah.
Yeah. Great, Steve. Thanks a lot, Steve Finlay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, and yeah, we covered a lot of ground there, and I think that in terms of the whole Allard thing, we did pretty well on that side, and
Well, we can- when
Justin
already
has to come
continue to
back,
grow.
and his team's going to make some new rules coming up here soon. So I think Justice Phelan was thinking of that as well, and he's like, whatever, I'm not screwing with it until 6 months down the road they're going to come forward with a new system. So we'll
I have this just feeling that in 6 months, can they ask for an extension? Because I know
they might not be ready
WCB
yet.
always does that. Like, oh, we need another 90-day extension. Like, well, how can you
I don't
guys do
think they
that?
can ask for an extension.
Can they ask for an extension, Steve? Can they ask for an until they look at a? Because they're talking about a legalization platform for 2017, where August 24th they have to put in some kind of a regulation for allowing me to continue to grow. Plus, patients that are not able to move their license, we can hear they're going to be able to do something at that point.
It's a funny thing, they can ask for an extension. Wasn't there a case a month or so ago in a different area where the government
Ask for an extension, yeah.
and the court said no?
Okay, they said no.
The trouble is, what does that mean?
Right.
Yeah, what does that mean? Yeah, what does that mean? Like, because they're.
Because the government said, well, I know you said no, I don't get an extension.
What if they do it anyways?
It's a legislation.
They're not going to
Yeah,
arrest
so
the
we're
government.
just we're gonna.
So they could ask for an extension, the government or the judge could say no, and then the government could just do it anyways. So who knows? I don't
Well,
think.
I
I think the
see
government
that
can
with these
basically
type
do
of-
whatever it wants to do, on a lot of levels. It just has to. It goes back and forth with the courts.
Delaying it somewhat, it seems.
Yeah,
They still have to do it.
they still have to eventually do it,
That was an enjoyable one. I like.
or
that
get
one.
voted out. I guess is the ultimate diss.
Was that one
because
enjoyable?
Then you can't put the government in jail.
Enjoyable.
Yeah, I guess maybe you can put individual members of the government in jail. Some. If they keep
Just
throwing,
gonna
if Justin keeps throwing those elbows in the House of Parliament, he might be thrown in jail.
Oh, he's going to jail.
Nah, there's an investigation into Justin's odd behavior. I read they're gonna, because he was, grabbing that conservative MP by the arm. That's a physical act against another member in the House of Parliament. I'd say that's completely
You know what
inappropriate.
happened is he probably
And it
was
was
at
actually
lunch,
that's
he
a
had a
big
few- he had
for
a
me.
couple
That's kind of a
scotches.
big deal, actually.
Yeah, why did
I
grab
think
him?
everybody's like, oh, it's just a distraction, blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, no. You can't go and physically accost other members of the government as a member of the government, especially if you're the goddamn
Especially
prime minister.
If
Like,
you're
what
the
is
prime
that?
minister grabbing somebody
What's
by
he
the arm and
thinking?
say,
It's completely insane.
I
I'm
have to
so-
agree with you.
Yeah.
This is interesting because there was this.
Steve, you got to get back over here.
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
microphone.
get Steve
Come
and
on,
Mike
Steve.
again here.
Get back
No,
in
I
here.
really, to me, that's like, what? Uh-oh,
we
we lost
ran into
our
an
cam there.
odd
Let's
thing
on
there,
that
no
one.
problem.
Aaron, oh.
But it has nothing to do specifically with cannabis, but your point about that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I tend to agree, and it reminds me of I received a fundraising request from the Liberal Party a couple months ago asking me for money to help implement the things that the government had to do. And I got really pissed off. I didn't send them any money and I didn't write anything, but my point was, no, wait a minute. If you're looking for money for things the government has to do, the people who should be getting that money are the government. You are a political party. You are not the government. The government,
That's weird.
Someone said he's under mind control.
the government includes a guy in Calgary named Stephen Harper. He's part of the government
Right.
because it's Parliament. And if you're looking for money to implement and make government policy happen, that's the government's job. And
What were
you
they
are
asking-
a political party. You are not the government.
What were
That
they
was-
asking for?
It was something to do with help make the government's priorities become a reality, donate to the party. Well, no. You aren't the government. You're a party.
Agreed 100%. That's wrong. No, they shouldn't be selling it like that.
No.
But, Sorry, we're eating candy here. Thanks, Steve.
I stopped eating because
Appreciate you coming
someone on
down.
camera says that.
Yeah.
I gotta stop eating. You know what? I just like smoked a whole bunch of weed and got the harsh munchies, and when I was like, here, I'm
I'm totally munching out.
like smoking weed.
No.
So far we've been testing this. Let's see.
I love you, J-Mac. You were on the
love
show
you, J-Mac.
last week.
He's always on there.
Unless you got something to talk about, you can't come on the show. Cause
So-
I'm just joking. You can come on the show. You don't have to have anything to talk about, but don't come on right now. I got more stuff to do, but I'll get you on in a little bit and then we'll get high. Cause you're very distracting and you're always yelling on the mic. Got to keep that voice under control. He's
I
playing
just-
video
what did we
games
just
over there.
smoke?
What
We
game
just
is that?
smoking.
That looks pretty dope.
Number 27.
Gangster Vegas. He looks like he's driving a Harley.
Well,
So, Johnny, what I wanted to do,
yes.
the next segment I wanted to do here is about the Lift Expo and the giant baggies that we have here full of amazing marijuana products. And you're doing a
And we're
like
still over here.
rigorous
We got
job over
27
here.
more
You've been
strains.
marking up. You're like doing mad work over here, man.
Have to.
I-
There's only 20 judges. And judges mean something.
I know. I'm so. I gotta
You know,
work.
man.
This is one that I actually have to do. I always fail at these. Like
It's okay. I've eaten all
constantly.
the edibles, so I can pretty much tell you what's going on there.
I fail constantly at
I
these.
put down in the comments. I don't think anything here will really
But look
affect
at these.
me
Okay,
anyways.
so we got a massive
If you want to
bag of
send me an
extracts
edible
here.
bag, I'm just saying you better give me the triple amount with the edibles.
This is all extracts in this bag. This is a big, huge bag of extracts. There's no way I'll be able to smoke all of this
Yes, you can.
myself.
Okay, it's no problem. Well, the best part about this is I can help you. So I'll take the number 33.
What'd you do with my weed
I'll
bag?
take the bubble hash concentrate with the rosin. I already know what numbers I like. Here, I can show you.
Here's my weed bag. Okay, look at this giant
How can we
sack
smoke in my
of
weed bag?
sacks.
It's right here.
I know, but you got yours, but I'm showing it off.
This is awesome.
It's the same as yours, but I'm just showing it to the people who haven't seen it. Look how plump this is.
What
There's
is
a
it?
lot of
Okay,
weed in
so
here.
we need to get the weed count.
How many strains is it? How many grams is
How many
it? Good
grams?
question.
Here, I'll tell you right now.
I don't know. I don't know how much is in each bag. I assume it's more than a
1,
gram.
2,
It looks
3,
like at
4,
least a
5,
gram and a half in
6.
each bag,
No,
maybe
they're all
two.
different.
They're all different.
7, 8,
It's a
9,
lot
10,
of herb,
11,
though.
12, 13,
There's a lot here.
17,
I feel
19.
honored to have one of them. And it's not, people say Lift is just the LPs, blah, blah, blah. No, this is, none of this weed could have possibly come from the LPs because it's not legal. And they wouldn't do it. So
41 strains.
this is all
41
illegal,
and,
illegal,
and
illegal.
you know what? It's like a gram,
So
1.5.
Lift is not some like just
Yeah, pretty
front of
much the
or whatever.
LPs
Like, look
cannot
at it.
enter
They're
the
taking
weed
some
in here.
risks here, guys. Like
Yeah,
that's
they're
not.
doing it.
I would say that their expo is not just some front
Like
for
the
the LPs.
CBD
I think they're
Renee
working
and the
with
CBD
everyone,
Medi
but
Haze and the CBD Skunk Haze didn't come from an LP. and the
topicals.
AC/DC.
These are all topicals, including
the sex lube.
sex spray, whatever that is. So I'm not sure what
works.
sex spray is.
Just
but
saying.
it works. You spray it,
Test
and
that
all of a
shit
sudden you're
out.
having sex.
And it got- I was like, sex lube. How's it make you feel?
What? The lube?
You haven't tried it? J-Man, can I get the lube? Well, you know what? You
I'm
gotta-
really high now.
Why?
Oh, I want to smoke more of this stuff.
Okay, then here. What's
This
that?
this is the stuff. We should put that on cam.
Well,
That's
this is
the
going to be the Congo
LHO.
LHO.
the Congo LHO. I want
you
to hit
go.
that again. That's really nice.
And for some reason, it's not under solventless. It's under something else. It's under concentrate.
Oh shit! I
Black
got
solventless
dabs all over the glass.
concentrate.
So
Solventless concentrate rosin.
David Malmalevine was
What
talking
number was that?
earlier about what?
What number was that one?
This one, the Congo.
Yeah,
Oh.
in that container right there.
Oh, 14 or some shit. Where's the container bottom? I dropped it. I think it's 14, Johnny.
Chair.
Look up 14. I have a broken finger. Oh, here we go. I'm gonna
Don't
hit
blame
this.
it on the finger. Blames everything on the broken finger. He's like, I got a broken finger. It's like,
It's true. I mean, I was trying to do stuff and I.
it's okay. I understand. I had a lot of movement problems myself. I can't find it.
14.
Smoked it. Well, you know what? It's really interesting what's happening in Toronto, what's going on in Vancouver. We had our first
Mother.
dispensary has been licensed to actually the number one. They're on. I don't even know what this one is. It just came out of nowhere.
The Wealth Shop.
I sold them some meditainers in the very beginning. A really nice lady, and they're set up where the British Chocolates is across. I think on West 4th. Am I right? Or is that the one up on 10th?
No, it's on West 4th.
West 4th.
It's at the mall. You haven't sold them Medtainers. Remember, we were looking at the thing and you're like, where the hell's that?
Yeah, that one's. Is that?
No, it's in a mall.
That's not West 4th. It's West 10th, isn't it?
Or West 10th. I don't remember. But you
Okay.
said West 10th, and it's on West 4th.
It's on West 4th. Anyways, so we have our first legal license facility in Vancouver. We need to talk to them because I want to know what weed they're actually licensed to distribute. Because I'm curious. Are they distributing their buddies' weed, or are they distributing from an LP? I'd really like to understand more about that. And I have friends that are in the final stages, and they haven't been, no one knows exactly where their cannabis product's coming from. They haven't really said it yet, right? Mm-hmm. But now that this other one's open, I'm curious on, are they just continuing as business as usual, and are they actually purchasing and giving out receipts to the person that's bringing them that, and are they paying tax on it? How is this system working right now?
That's a good question, Johnny.
It's really
B.
got to be known. Like what's going on now that we have our first one? What's happening?
Yeah, well, there seems to be a lot of back and forth on what exactly is going on.
Right,
To me, it seems like there's, we have media reports of the Toronto mayor going out there and wanting to close things down, making threats. They're posting.
So this is Toronto now. So
This
now
is Toronto.
now that we had Vancouver set precedents, and I was looking up some old stuff that I gave the lawyer recently.
Yeah.
And Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, put in a regulatory system for dispensing cannabis in Vancouver in 2005. Mm-hmm. It was ran
Talk to the microphone.
It was ran into the United Nations in 2008 at the UN convention here related to pharmaceutical drugs and harm reduction. There was a drug convention. I can't remember the exact name of it. Mm-hmm. And now we're seeing that same system now being implemented 10 years later. And I've been talking to a lot of people about this. And we're seeing a lot of the research that we saw when Health Canada went around to all the clubs in 2011, 2012, talked to people, like Hillary, Riel Kapler, mm-hmm. Philip Lucas, mm-hmm. All these people that are now working with all the facilities and stuff. So
yep.
We're seeing...
Yeah, but those facilities, unfortunately, like in the case of, let's say, Hillary Black, she's working for Tweed, or she works for... Yeah, in Bedrocan, or that's who she works for, but it's all the same thing.
Well, it's now, there's another company's now bought out more companies, right? So now they're looking at getting different coverage. I know
And they're the ones who are asking or calling for the closure of the dispensaries, which is where Hillary kind of is originally from.
And yet her facility is actually got her the variance.
She basically invented the dispensaries.
And hers has got the variance. She got one of variance, right?
Yeah. But she is a variance.
Well, you know what? Some people and someone sent me a message, and some people got their foot on both sides because a lot of people are trying to help an industry at the same time. You know what? How do you fight a system unless you don't start working with the system to understand how the system's going to work?
You can't hold it against her. She's trying to do her best to deal with it all.
In order to get access to patients, that's what Hillary's main concern was: is getting access to patients.
Well, she's obviously not really getting through. I guess that's not her fault. Maybe she's getting through on lots of stuff.
Now we have Tilray. I'm not backing LPs. I'm backing access for patients. Never give away someone's right to grow their own.
Yeah.
Cannabis rights and freedom together. I mean, I think that's a great. And that's what we're fighting for. Is for our right to be able to consume cannabis legally, not go to jail for it. I mean, and like Steve was saying, steps are going to follow because in the beginning we had controlled liquor board. Now we have all these microbreweries. We know people that used to be in the seed business that have wineries.
Right. Exactly. We need you grows.
We need everybody to grow their own.
I know.
Everybody. If you can, plant seed. That's why I love Dan doing the overgrow.
So we also need to know about how marijuana affects the teenage brain.
You know what? It's really important that we understand that cannabis is, like I would say, it's in mother's milk. How do we get? It's more like Mark says. It's a preventative medicine. Mm-hmm. We should be taking it when we're kids. That's what it was around. Maybe not the high THC involved with it, but what about the full plant profile, the cannabinoids itself? That is basically, I always say, it's master regulator to the central nervous system, and it just helps regulate everything. And how it works with me.
I don't think there's enough science into it yet, and this is something that David Melma-Levine has been writing about for a while. David wrote an article for Cannabis Culture magazine that we developed into a book, and what we did was look at 24, the only studies we could find, every study we could find, about how marijuana affects the brain of youth or kids or anybody under the age of 20 or 21, whatever it is. And
I got my buddy.
We did a study of the studies.
And
it was the most comprehensive study of the studies you can find anywhere. And what we did was we put all of the studies that were done up to scientific scrutiny themselves. So we wanted to find out if any of the studies themselves would hold up to scientific scrutiny, and we have a criteria of things that they had to meet in order to be scientific, just like any study would. And unfortunately what we found was that none of them, except for maybe parts of one of them, really stood up to any sort of scientific scrutiny. And they were all, unfortunately, basically propaganda. And That means there are almost no serious studies into this subject. And that is really, really,
Well, there isn't
not
really
a good
any
thing.
studies
It's
put
something
into
we need to
cannabis
change
and-
right away. We need to be studying this stuff
But this
so we
is-
can actually know.
This is the thing. Cannabis hasn't really been studied because it's been illegal. So there's been
Right.
some scientific research and medical purposes. And that was sent in 1961. So we've really seen
Right.
no research on cannabis except for a few studies.
We've seen
at Harvard
only
and stuff
any
like
of the
that.
studies that have been done were positive studies, actually, or had showed something positive. Like, for instance, the one done in Jamaica that was over 20 years that looked at what happens with children who get it through their mothers when they're born, pregnant mothers smoking marijuana. They did a long study in Jamaica on that subject,
Yeah,
and
it's
they
fine.
found that the kids are fine.
Well, yeah, it's because it's called endocannabinoid system.
Right. Now, I want to watch David Mallevine's
Yes.
interview on The National. This is one of Canada's largest news organs, CBC News, their platform station or their flagship show with Peters Manbridge. Peters Manbridge. Not Peter Mansbridge, Peters Manbridge. Okay. I'm going to play this, and here, you guys watch. Enjoy. What happened? Doesn't seem to be working anymore.
Myths have always clouded the conversation about marijuana. Teenagers first heard it would turn them into delinquents, could make them crazy. Lately, a new, more positive narrative has emerged, visible through the smoke in the huge turnout for 420 celebrations. That message is that weed is harmless. In fact, it's smart medicine. With legalization coming to Canada, now is the time to agree on which version is closer to the truth. What really are the risks to developing teenage brains? I'm curious, what do you think smoking a lot of marijuana will do to your young brains?
I think the older community has a lot of built-up ideas about that, thinks it's going to wreck our brains. So far, I'm doing well.
How much do you smoke?
Every day.
You smoke every day and you don't think it's going to hurt your brain in the long run?
Not really.
There are probably thousands of high schoolers who skip school to be here to get stoned.
I do a lot of research with marijuana, and I have read with recent studies that they have noticed it does not lower the IQ. So I do try to use it safely as I can to make sure that I am not one of those kids that you look at and they're like, oh, like they obviously smoke pot, like they can't handle themselves, they're such high bags.
How much do you smoke?
I probably smoke about 3 grams in a day.
3 grams a day.
Yeah.
That's an awful lot, isn't it?
Yeah, used to be worse, but cut down.
I've been smoking weed for about 4 years now, so it has become part of my daily routine.
And you don't think that's could have some long-term impacts on your brain?
No, because I do keep my brain fresh. I try to keep it active.
We met Samantha Martinek. At 24, she's out of school and says not only did smoking up not hurt her, it's actually made her a better person.
So I smoked weed all through university, and I was on the dean's list the whole entire time. It wasn't something that turned me into, like a dead brain person like most people say, but it's just, I don't know, it was just something that soothed me and relaxed me. It doesn't make me dumb, it doesn't make me dependent.
Over and over, we heard teenagers tell us that marijuana is a lot safer than some of the other stuff kids are taking.
I'm just saying they're giving kids a bunch of messed up pills anyway, right? That mess up their brains, like ADHD pills, and they shouldn't be taking those, so might as well just be smoking pot. It's a lot better for you.
We now know that lots of high achievers smoked a fair bit of marijuana when they were teens, and they turned out okay. People such as Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, and Canadian actor Seth Rogen. Some early efforts to demonize marijuana users now seem utterly ridiculous.
I know what you want. You want to kill me. You're crazy.
The 1930s cult classic Reefer Madness portrayed pot smokers as lunatics.
This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs.
By the 1980s, the tactics had become more refined, but the scary message was the same.
Any questions?
While kids may have believed that hard drugs like heroin could ruin their lives, they didn't feel the same way about marijuana. The fact that there are now so many dispensaries around and that authorities let them get away with it reflects not just a tolerance for weed, but an acceptance that the harms have been overblown. But just how overblown?
We know that the teenage brain is undergoing a significant amount of development during the period of adolescence. So this is about up to the age of 25.
Dr. Amy Porath-Waller is the Director of Research with the Canadian Centre for Substance Abuse.
We know that marijuana can impact cognitive functioning, so skills such as memory, the ability to plan.
Her group's latest report, compiling all that scientists have discovered about marijuana and young brains, paints a scary picture. The brain's prefrontal cortex, which controls key functions such as decision-making, judgment, planning, and problem-solving, appears very susceptible to cannabis. Just as the brain is wiring itself, THC essentially hijacks the process and confuses things. But there are some big caveats. Scientists also think how much people smoke and how potent the marijuana is plays a role. And so do other behaviors, like combining heavy drinking with heavy marijuana use. Then there's the question of whether marijuana is addictive or a gateway to harder drugs. The answer seems to be not in the same way tobacco and alcohol are, but people can still become dependent.
I feel guilty. I do. I have for a long time. Here we go.
People such as Matt Cholo.
That was good. That was the right amount.
He's 24 and lives in Toronto, and he blames excessive marijuana use as a teen and right up to the present for ruining his dreams. Dreams that included making a living from his favorite pastime, golf.
It's impressive.
Not going to get much better than that.
We met up at the Don Valley Golf Course, a place that's like a second home for him.
And what would be your ideal job?
I just want to teach.
Cholo is good.
And soft.
But he should be better.
Soft.
A teen phenom, he says he slid backwards after he started smoking a lot of marijuana.
I wish I'd never started because it's taken control of my life. It's turned me into something I don't like. It's totally ruined my character. Again, with the confidence, I don't believe in myself anymore.
Being a touring pro was always a long shot, but a teaching pro, getting his professional designation and working his way up at a club, that he felt was totally within reach.
All my drive went out the window. All I wanted to do was be in bed and smoke weed.
Kind of robbed you of your drive, your motivation?
Exactly. But it's more so just kept me in that depressed state of mind.
He says he's tried to quit, but surrounded by pot-smoking friends, a series of depressing breakups, and long winters without golf, and he says he has not been able to stop.
I could almost hear people, though, when they hear your story, say, well, he's clearly got bigger problems than marijuana.
Yes, but marijuana has created some of those problems. Not all of them, but some of those problems would not be there if it wasn't for weed. It's brought out the demons in me, that's for sure.
This summer, Cholo has found a golf-related job that he hopes will be a stepping stone. Maybe it's the year he can turn things around.
That's the one.
To the warriors of the legalization movement, talk of dependence and of brain damage sounds like a lot more reefer madness.
I feel like some progress has been made, but now we have to address this myth of inherent harm to young people. And unless we deal with that issue, we're just going to get stuck with a crappy version of legalization.
David Malmo-Levine is one of Vancouver's legendary marijuana crusaders. He's fought Canada's marijuana laws in the Supreme Court.
If you're harmless, you should not be harmed.
And lost. He's also poured his efforts into debunking the notion that marijuana is harmful by writing books and dispensing advice along with marijuana.
Why do you call it a myth?
If cannabis makes you stupid and crazy, and if the use rates have skyrocketed since the 1950s and 60s. Well, that would show up in the general population statistics, but it doesn't, and they won't explain it. I talked to Vancouver Coastal Health, I talked to the Center for Substance Abuse, and nobody will explain it. No one will even enter a dialogue and look at the evidence. It's like they're going like this, la la la, pot is harmful to teens, pot is harmful to teens.
In a book full of advice to the Justice Minister on how to legalize, Malmo Levine says the worst harm that can come to teens is by having a criminal record for using marijuana.
So what would you do if you were writing these rules with this opportunity to legalize?
Well, I'd follow the Senate report's recommendations and say 16 and over can buy in stores, 15 and under with a parental and physician supervision, they can also access cannabis, and then we can protect all our young people from harm.
There's widespread agreement now that better research and education on marijuana use is crucial.
There is a lot of conflicting information out there.
This recent forum brought together parents.
Going back to our other cam because of some technical difficulties. Not sure if you guys can actually see this or not, but I think we're going to have to. No, it doesn't look like anybody out there can see it. It'll probably show up on the version when you guys watch it after the fact, though. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and stop this one and start again on a new recording. That's really all we can do. I don't see what else we can do besides hit refresh again. Let's try that. Refresh. I don't really think that's going to do anything, though. YouTube sometimes does some oddness. We're not really sure what it is, but we're going to go ahead and start it on a new one. So we might as well just do that right now. Stopping this one.